Paris, summer of 1981. A city of romance and light, with cobblestone streets, charming cafes, and an air filled with art and dreams. But behind its beauty, there are shadows that few could ever imagine. In a small apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood lived a Japanese exchange student. Small, frail, with timid eyes. To outsiders he appeared harmless, almost invisible. But inside the mind of Issei Sagawa, a terrifying secret had been festering since adolescence. A dark obsession with women, an inferiority complex about his own body, and an uncontrollable desire to consume human flesh. At the same time, Paris was home to a young woman, Renée Hartevelt, 25 years old, from the Netherlands, intelligent, graceful, with a passion for literature, and always willing to lend a helping hand. When Renée accepted an invitation to visit Sagawa's apartment for a study session, she had no idea it would be the last decision of her life. What happened next would shock the entire world, a crime so grotesque that many believed it could only belong in the realm of horror fiction. But this was no fiction, this was reality, and reality was far more horrifying than any nightmare. This is the story of Issei Sagawa, the forever known as the Cannibal of Paris. A murderer, a cannibal, who somehow walked free for decades. Portrait of Issei Sagawa. Issei Sagawa was born on April 26, 1949 in Kobe, Japan. He came from privilege. His father was the director of a successful publishing company, wealthy and well-respected, while his mother was a gentle homemaker devoted to her children. To the outside world, Sagawa's life looked perfect. But from the very beginning, he carried a heavy burden. Born prematurely, he was frail and sickly. Even as an adult, he stood only about 1.45 meters tall, painfully thin, with an awkward, shuffling gait. In a culture that valued strength and masculinity, Sagawa felt like an outcast, a shadow of a man. Withdrawn and lonely, he buried himself in books. Literature became his refuge, a place where he could escape the humiliation of his body. Yet at the same time, deep inside, another obsession was taking root. When he saw tall, white-skinned Western women, he felt overwhelmed, a mixture of desire and inferiority. In his mind, they embodied everything he could never be. And gradually, he developed a disturbing belief. The only way to truly possess them was to make them a part of himself. Not through love, not even through sex, but through eating their flesh. Years later, Sagawa would openly confess, "When I was about 11 or 12, I began to dream of eating a tall, white woman. It wasn't just a passing thought, it was an obsession that followed me for the rest of my life." As he grew older, he excelled academically, especially in literature. On the surface, he appeared to be a quiet, bookish young man. But beneath that frail exterior lay a twisted psyche, where insecurity, lust, and cannibalistic fantasies fused into a bottomless void of darkness. Meeting Renée Hartevelt, after years of living with his obsessions in Japan, Issei Sagawa decided to leave for the West. In 1977, he arrived in Paris, a city that was, for him, both paradise and torment. Here, he was surrounded by the very women he had fantasized about, tall, white, elegant. But each encounter only deepened his feelings of inadequacy, fueling the twisted cravings inside him. Sagawa rented a small, modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. On paper, he was a PhD student in literature at the prestigious Sorbonne University. In reality, he was a lonely man, buried in books and drifting further into his dark fantasies. And then fate brought him to Renée Hartevelt. Renée was a 25-year-old student from the Netherlands. She was everything he was not: intelligent, cultured, fluent in several languages, with a passion for literature and art. She played piano, loved poetry, and dreamed of becoming a translator, a dream that reflected both ambition and innocence. Friends remembered her as warm, generous, always ready to help. At first glance, Renee and Sagawa were worlds apart. She was tall, healthy, full of life. He was frail, short, and painfully shy. But Sagawa saw an opening, their mutual love of literature. He invited her to his small apartment under the pretense of reading poetry and discussing research. Trusting and kind, Renee agreed, visiting him on several occasions. To Renee, Sagawa was nothing more than a quiet classmate, a little eccentric perhaps, but harmless. To Sagawa, however, she was not a classmate at all. She was the embodiment of his darkest dream, a tall, white-skinned, beautiful woman he longed to consume. With every visit, his obsession grew stronger. And in his mind, one thought began to eclipse all others. Renee was the perfect target to finally satisfy the cannibalistic desire he had carried since childhood. During their study sessions, Renee might have thought she was simply helping a fellow student. She could never have imagined that the man sitting quietly across from her was looking at her not as a friend, but as prey. The night of horror. Paris, June 11, 1981. The city of light glowed peacefully, unaware that inside a modest apartment in the 16th arrondissement, one of the most grotesque crimes of the century was about to take place. Sagawa spent the entire day restless. He cleaned and rechecked the pistol he had purchased, rehearsing in his mind what was about to happen. He set the table with wine, books, and a tape recorder, props for what would look like an ordinary study session. But in truth, every item in that room was part of a sinister plan. Renee Hartevelt, 25, walked in with her books and her usual gentle smile. She believed she was simply helping a fellow student practice. She had visited before and nothing had ever seemed out of place. The apartment smelled of cigarettes, dimly lit by a single yellow bulb. She sat down, opened her books, and began to read aloud. Her voice floated through the air, soft, melodic, reciting lines of German poetry. To anyone else, it would have been a peaceful evening. To Sagawa, every syllable sounded like a ticking clock, pushing him closer to the moment he had dreamed of for decades. Standing behind her, gun in hand, his heart pounded. In his mind, now or never. If you hesitate, you'll never get another chance. He raised the pistol, aimed at the back of her neck, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The shot rang out. Renee collapsed forward, blood spreading rapidly across the open book. Her voice stopped forever in that instant. Silence. Sagawa stood over her, panting. But instead of horror, what he felt was relief and joy. He stripped her body, touched her skin, and later confessed, "When I touched her, I knew my dream had come true." With trembling hands, he took out a knife. At first, his cuts were clumsy, hesitant, but soon he grew bolder. Flesh separated, blood flowed. He tasted, a small bite, then another and another. He chewed, swallowed, and felt ecstasy. This was the moment he had waited for since childhood. He brought out a camera and began photographing every stage. He wanted to immortalize what he saw as his art. For hours, he alternated between eating, photographing, and speaking to himself as if officiating a twisted ritual. By dawn, the apartment was saturated with the stench of blood and decay. Renee's body was no longer whole. Sagawa slumped to the floor, exhausted, but with a look of utter satisfaction. That night, June 11, 1981, marked the moment when obsession fully transformed into atrocity. Disposal and arrest, the secret exposed. After a long night drenched in blood, Sagawa faced a practical problem: how to get rid of René's body. He stuffed the remains into 2 large suitcases, wrapped them in blankets and plastic bags. His plan was simple: dump them into the lake at Bois de Boulogne, a park in Paris where discarded items often ended up. Struggling with his small, frail frame, barely 4'9" tall, he dragged the heavy suitcases down the street, sweating profusely. The weight was overwhelming, his movements awkward and clumsy, attracting attention. At the lake Bois de Boulogne, Sagawa tried to push the suitcases into the water, but the splash was too loud, and blood seeped out through the seams. A passerby, suspicious, approached and called the police. When police opened the suitcases, they were horrified. A dismembered female body, the smell of blood and decay filled the air. The victim was soon identified as René Hartevelt, the Dutch student from Sorbonne. Word spread quickly among the international student community. Shock turned into terror. No one could comprehend how this had happened to someone like René. Detectives retraced René's steps. Who had she last seen? Who often invited her over? All clues led to a single name: Issei Sagawa. Multiple witnesses confirmed René had been seen with him shortly before her disappearance. Days later, police raided Sagawa's apartment. Inside, they found bloodstains, photographs of mutilation, and cutting tools. Sagawa did not resist. Instead, he calmly confessed, "Yes, I killed her. I wanted to eat her." The investigators were stunned, not only by the brutality of the crime, but by the chilling nonchalance with which he admitted it. News of the arrest shook Paris, then the world. Newspapers labeled it a crime of unprecedented horror in France's history. The public was outraged, students were terrified, and everyone asked the same question: how could a man so frail, so quiet, commit such a monstrous act? But what came next, during the legal proceedings, would prove even more shocking. The strange trial and escape from justice. After his arrest, Issei Sagawa became the center of attention across France. Newspapers and TV outlets covered the case of the Japanese cannibal in Paris. The public was horrified yet fascinated. What could drive a frail, intellectual student to commit such a barbaric crime? In 1983, Sagawa's trial began in Paris. But instead of a tense battle for justice, the proceedings took an unbelievable turn. Court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that Sagawa was legally insane, suffering from schizophrenia, and incapable of controlling his actions. The result? The court declared Issei Sagawa not criminally responsible. He would not face prison time, only confinement in a psychiatric hospital. The decision outraged Europe. René Hartevelt's family was devastated, calling it a betrayal of justice. The media branded it a stain on the legal system. But the real shock came a few years later. The French authorities decided to deport Sagawa back to Japan. The reasoning? The cost of keeping him institutionalized was too high, and since he was a Japanese citizen, he should be sent home. Once in Japan, however, doctors re-evaluated him, and their findings stunned everyone. They concluded that Sagawa was completely sane. He had clear memory, logical reasoning, and full awareness of his crime. Yet because Japan's legal system at the time could not retry a case already judged abroad, Sagawa was set free. From that moment, he became known as the cannibal at large, a free man whose presence haunted both Japan and the world. The twisted celebrity life of Issei Sagawa. After being released in Japan, Issei Sagawa unexpectedly became a media sensation. Instead of being shunned, he was pursued by journalists, publishers, and even TV producers. He began recounting his crime in graphic, chilling detail, never showing remorse. In fact, he described the act of eating René as a beautiful experience. This shamelessness both disgusted and fascinated the public. In 1985, he published his first memoir, In the Fog, vividly recounting the murder. More books followed, novels, cultural commentaries, and even illustrated comics depicting cannibalism. Japanese TV shows invited him to appear, where Sagawa casually explained what it felt like to bite into René's flesh. At one point, he was ironically hired as a food critic, mocking society itself. He also painted erotic artworks of nude Western women, selling them for high prices, and even collaborated on manga projects. The world looked on in disbelief. How could a cannibal killer become a celebrity? For René Harteveldt's family, it was unbearable. Her parents said that seeing Sagawa free to brag on television was more cruel than any execution could ever be. But for Sagawa, this was his second life. He once declared, "I achieved my dream. I ate her. I feel no regret." His words shocked the world. Here was a murderer who not only escaped justice but turned his crime into a twisted form of fame. The final years and a haunting legacy. By the 2000s, Issei Sagawa's grotesque celebrity had faded. The public grew tired, the media stopped chasing him. He lived in poverty, relying entirely on his family. After his parents died, Sagawa was left isolated, plagued by illness. In 2013, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair. The once feared cannibal became a frail old man, dependent on caregivers. Yet, even in his broken state, he never expressed remorse. In one of his last interviews, he admitted, "My only regret is that I could not eat another woman." On November 24, 2022, Issei Sagawa died in Tokyo from pneumonia at the age of 73. His passing was quiet, no public funeral, no mourners, but his story endures, a dark shadow in the annals of crime. Sagawa remains a chilling reminder of a disturbing question. How could a civilized society allow a cannibal killer to become a celebrity? For many, he is not just a murderer. He is living proof of terrifying flaws in justice and a warning that evil, if exploited, can be twisted into entertainment.